Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespi, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. But let's talk about what we're doing today, because today we have another spectacular guest. He is a University of South Carolina School of Law graduate and currently works at Boeing. He's held past positions as a partner at Nelson Mullins and as the Chief Operations Attorney at Delta Airlines. Finally, he's the author of his brand new book, Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders. Excited to have him on the podcast today, Mr. Mark Fava. Before getting into the episode today, a few minutes of ads now. For no ads in the middle, no ads at the end. To support this podcast, please be sure to check out all the sponsors below: Start LSAT, Rhetoric, and LisaBlaster.com. If these sponsors bring great interest to you, please check out the sponsor links below in the description. I love them, and I hope you love them as much as I do. And of course, be sure to check us out at lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. One word, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. Start LSAT, started by former guest Alden Spratt, 21-year-old superstar and now an official sponsor of the Lawyers in the Making podcast. Start LSAT was built on breaking down barriers, allowing anyone access to high-quality LSAT prep. After receiving a 180 perfect score on his LSAT, yes, 180, Alden began building Start LSAT. Start LSAT includes 51 video modules, 400 official LSAT questions, study tips and tricks, and the techniques that took Alden to achieve that 180 perfect score. All for the low price of $110. Yes, that's right, $110. And when using code LITM10, you can get 10% off the Start LSAT self-paced course. But there's more. By using the code LITM100 at checkout, you also get $100 off Alden's upcoming 10-week course for the January LSAT. This 10-week course includes one-on-one tutoring, live classes, the Start LSAT self-paced course with 50-plus modules, weekly classes, access to Law Hub Advantage, and a direct line to the superstar himself, Alden. Alden focuses on building the muscles of your LSAT skills, training them, and making you unstoppable. Check out Start LSAT in the podcast description below at startlsat.com, where you can find offers for the course and one-on-one tutoring. And be sure to use those promo codes LITM100 at checkout for $100 off the 10-week course and LITM10 for 10% off the Start LSAT self-paced course. That is at startlsat.com, one word, startlsat.com in the description below. Now it's time to talk about one of the sponsors of this podcast, Rhetoric. Rhetoric is a legal tech company that leverages AI to help litigators tailor their arguments to be more persuasive by understanding judges' preferences and tendencies based on their actual filings. A recent study published in Harvard Business Review shows that mirroring a judge's language preferences can increase your odds of success in litigation by 20% or more, and that is exactly what Rhetoric does for you. Back on episode 25, I had the privilege of having Luke Yangling, a good friend of mine and a former guest of the podcast, and from there, Rhetoric thus became a sponsor of the podcast. But now, Rhetoric has some new products to offer. With their brand new product, Cicero, students can replicate the experience of responding to a judge's question in court or the demands of cold calls. This product helps develop and refine verbal communication skills through tailored feedback on the quality of the student's presentation, providing endless practice opportunities. Using Debrief, students can hone their persuasive legal writing using the same tools that major law firms across the United States leverage to perform better than opposing counsel. Students can learn to write with flair and command of writers at the top firms using Debrief's analytics and drafting tools. Not only can rhetoric upgrade and enhance your writing skills, but can now also help law students excel in the classroom and the courtroom while alleviating the stress of cold calls and performance demands. If you're interested in a demo, let them know you heard it here first, here from Nate. And to support this podcast, check out Rhetoric in the description below at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com.
Law students, are you feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or short on time in law school? Maybe you just want someone to show you a step-by-step framework to master the topics you're learning in your classes. I know the pressure you're under, and I've got the perfect solution for you. My course, The Law School Operating System, is proven to help you conquer law school with confidence and ease.
Created by Lisa Blasser, a former guest on the podcast and founder of the Law School Success Institute, this course breaks down every subject into manageable main topics that you run through a comprehensive study system to thoroughly prepare you for class and final exams. No more feeling like you need to know everything all at once in the beginning.
But that's not all, Nate. The Law School Operating System also teaches you how to schedule your studying and time effectively. For every topic, you'll know which study step you're on and when you'll complete it every week of your semester. No more mad dash cram sessions, more time with your loved ones. And with my system, you'll walk into your exams knowing you've given 100% of yourself, that there's nothing more you could have done to succeed, and there's no better confidence than that.
Lisa breaks it down like this: one class, one list of main topics, and one system to master each topic. With recorded and live sessions for students available on her website and partnerships with law schools nationwide, the Law School Operating System is here to help you thrive from day one to the final exam. Ready to take control of your law school journey and operate at your full potential in law school? Visit www.lisablasser.com today and enroll in the Law School Operating System. Be sure to use code LSOSNATE10 at checkout for 10% off the recorded course. That is code LSOSNATE10 at checkout. People of the world, Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever. And this is my episode with Mark Fava. Mr. Mark Fava, welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Nate, I'm doing great. It's good to be here.
Of course. Well, I am so excited to have you here today, Mark. There's so much going on. You got wonderful things going on, and we're going to get into it all. But before we get started, Mark, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm an aviation lawyer by career. I've been doing that over 30 years now. And I got my start in the Navy as a Naval Flight Officer. I was flying around in the back of P-3s back in the Cold War, chasing Soviet submarines, Chapel Hill ROTC graduate. And then after 5 or 6 years in the Navy, decided to go to law school and stayed in the reserves and have been doing law ever since. I did 24 years in the reserves and 6 years active duty, and just recently wrote my first book. So it's great to be on the podcast, and congratulations for over a year in existence and over 90 episodes, my friend.
Thank you so much, Mark. And that book Mark is talking about, the audience can't see me holding it up, but Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom, and Sea Stories for Leaders is Mark's new book, and it will be in the description below for all of you to check it out, to pre-order on Amazon. It is a wonderful book. I read it all, and I thought it was amazing. Every single page, it's full of so much wisdom. There is so much to learn there. But let's get into your wonderful journey here. You were at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. You were in ROTC, but you have many friends that are in ROTC as well. So I'm quite familiar with the concept itself and what goes into it. But you graduated there in 1985. What a year it was. I remember it well. But you then joined the Navy in 1985. You were in the Navy for almost 30 years, for a little over 30 years, which is a spectacular accomplishment. And of course, I have to thank you for doing that. Of course, the veterans need to get their thanks. And of course, I'm thanking you here today. But
Thank you.
As you went into the Navy, after 5 or 6 years, you then landed at the University of South Carolina Law School. And simply put, Mark, why'd you go to law school in the first place?
Yeah, great question. I sort of like you, I was always intrigued about it. I loved writing in high school. When I went into the Navy, at that time, the aspect and the thought of flying was really neat. I wasn't a pilot. I was a backseat in a plane that tracked these Soviet submarines. And then I got assigned in the Navy as a collateral duty as a legal officer. So the daytime I'm flying around in the plane, and if I'm not doing that, in the military, you have this collateral duty, and mine was a legal officer. And I had a great JAG lawyer that started talking to me, and he said, "What are your thoughts about ever being a lawyer?" And I said, "You know what? I've always thought about it." And that was really my first lawyer mentor. And he's the one that I ended up listening to. And he's the one that was actually on the Admiral's staff. I went to work with him and then went to law school. And that's really why I wanted to do it. I wanted to pursue that passion after 6 years of being in the Navy and then just stay in the reserves for the rest of the time.
I mean, I just have to say, the fact you were flying around in those planes in the back of the plane, tracking those P3 submarines, if I recall, did I get that right? Is that the right name of
Yeah, the P3 was the plane. It was the P3 Orion, and we would track the submarines. Yeah, we would track the submarines from the P3 with a crew of 12. And that's also where I learned teamwork and responsibility and accountability because every single person on that team had to do what they were tasked to do for us to fulfill a mission and to do it very well.
Yeah, I mean, every moving part has to do their moving part per se, because if it doesn't, it will all fall apart. Everyone needs to work in tandem. Everybody needs to be picture perfect. It's very similar, and not comparing soccer to flying planes because they're totally different things. But just like on the soccer pitch, everyone needs to be in unison. Everybody needs to be in the right spots so you could get that goal, either defend, whatever it may be. That's what I'm familiar with. I don't know anything about planes, and I don't know anything about chasing submarines. But regardless, you were at the University of South Carolina Law School. We love talking about the first year mark. Some people hate it, some people love it. How was it for you?
You know what? I was a little bit older, so I'd done 6 years in the Navy, and it was kind of a relief for me because the Navy it's a wonderful life, but it can be pretty challenging. So I was nervous about the fact that I was at law school, but I wasn't as nervous about the challenge because I had had those 6 years of being in the Navy, and I could show up in a pair of shorts. I didn't have to shave. I didn't have to go to class if I didn't want to. All the things that I had to do in the military, I didn't have to do at law school. So it was very enjoyable. And South Carolina was my home state, so it was just nice to be back home. But all the same horror stories are there in terms of the 1L small section. I had a professor that constantly called on me and would say, I'd give what I thought to be a brilliant answer, and he would say, "Well, strikes me, Mr. Fava." He goes, "That might be a right answer in some courts, but it's not in my classroom. Anybody else have another response?" And I'm just like, oh my God, every day when he called on me, it was just that one after another. But I really enjoyed law school, especially third year.
So, what was so special about that third year? Why'd you love it so much?
Yeah, first year is hard because it's new and because the thought of, you mean to tell me I'm going to read 600 pages, go to a whole semester of class, and it's all coming down to one final exam. I mean, it's mind-boggling, compared to undergrad. And second year was, I don't say it's easier because the magnitude of the courses are tougher and the amount of material is tougher, but you got it figured out by then. Look, you know what works and what doesn't work. You know which professors are good and which professors are maybe not so good. Third year is wonderful because by then you've completed all your core classes. You've got the end game in sight. You're doing fun classes, right? I was doing fun classes that I knew I could probably get an A in or that they were great professors and they were just gap fillers to fulfill my requirements. So third year was really a blast because you could see you're on the downslope.
So, after law school, or perhaps after law school, you could correct me, you became a federal judicial law clerk. It was your first job coming out of law school here. So, how was that experience? And within that experience, as you said before, you are an aviation lawyer by trade. So, throughout these experiences, throughout the specific experience as a federal judicial law clerk, how did you sort of figure out aviation lawyer was what you wanted to be, aviation lawyer was what you wanted to do? Sort of that question, that significant question I always love talking about on the podcast, what you want to do with your career, but also finding out what you don't want to do, sort of being able to narrow those options down and be able to really find that specialization that fits for you.
Yeah, that's a great question because everybody said, "Oh, that was something that you're so lucky," or that. How did you figure that out? And it took me another 4 or 5 years, and it was I clerked for a wonderful judge, and he's still my mentor today. He's still on the bench. When you read the book, he's in the acknowledgments. I tell you, I haven't changed jobs once without calling him. But after I finished clerking for him, like most folks, I went to a mid-size, what I would call a litigation insurance defense law firm. And I started doing automobile wrecks, right? That's what you do. You're defending the local wreck for the insurance company. I moved on a little bit and we started working for a partner that did train wrecks. So there's a lot of train wrecks in South Carolina. It's the home of Alex Murdoch, and Alex was actually in my law school class. But I enjoyed that too. It's the same theory, right? Something's moving fast, there's a collision, and bad things happen. But I really wanted to get into aviation law, and I ended up going to a bigger firm. And right before 9/11, a good friend of mine called and said, "Hey, why don't you come work for Delta Airlines?" And I was in Charleston, and my answer was not only no, but heck no, I'm not going to leave Charleston. And 60 days later, I packed up with my wife and we went to work for Delta Airlines. So there you go.
So through after that federal judicial law clerkship, you then became an associate attorney at Nelson Mullins, which was formerly Hainsworth, Marion, McKay, and Garrard. I hope I didn't butcher any of those names. I apologize to those people whose names I may have butchered. But you were there for 5 years, and then eventually you went to Delta Airlines. So can you talk about that experience and how it sort of led to you finally getting to that aviation law and finally becoming an aviation lawyer?
Yeah, I was at Hainsworth Law Firm, and and then I went. It's a smaller firm. And then I did go to Nelson Mullins, which is now just both of them are in existence. Wonderful firms still that have great lawyers. And I knew if I wanted to break into the aviation field, I had to go to an airline, or I had to go somewhere. To your point, I had to go where the market was, right? There was no aviation at the time in South Carolina. Didn't want to go there, didn't want to move to Atlanta, had a lot and a house ready to build with my wife. She looked at me and said, "We're not going," and we did. And that really crystallized what I wanted to do, right? Because I'm in-house, I'm the chief operations lawyer for a major air carrier. And 41 days later, the worst disaster ever happened in aviation history and to our nation. Boy, I got to work through that for the next 3 years. And I had finally gotten to be what I call a real aviation lawyer.
Now, getting to Delta Airlines, obviously making the big move. Your wife was like, "We're not doing it, Mark." And then you're like, "All right, and then she's like, "All right, I guess we're doing it." But taking that risk, making that jump, how important was that? And sort of how did you convince yourself that, okay, this is what I want to do. We're going to make the move.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great thing. I'm pretty risk averse, and have been almost all my life, right? And I will say, if you really want to be successful, you've got to open up the aperture and be a little bit more risk willing, or willing to take risks. And one of my best friends from high school was there at the time as a lawyer, and he was recruiting me. And again, this is friendship and mentoring. This is how I've gotten all my jobs, just knowing people and talking to people. And I interviewed with Delta. I came back. I was hemming and hawing, and he finally put me over the edge. He said, "Mark," he says, "what do you have to lose? You come here, you don't like it, you go right back to your law firm. There's no downside. There's only upside." And he was exactly right. I would encourage your listeners that when you're trying to figure that out, go do something that's out of your comfort zone and give it a shot, because the rewards can be immense. And the downside, not too bad. Everybody I know that's ever gone to a startup that's failed, they've all emerged just fine. Matter of fact, most of them have been a lot better off from having done that than otherwise.
Oh, I have to agree with that more than anything, Mark. I know, I personally know people who have been a part of startup companies that have unfortunately dissolved, and they are much better off than they were beforehand. But it's sort of being able to tell yourself that, okay, I did do that. It may have
Yep.
failed, but I still did it. I still put in the work. I still put in the hours, and I was able to go through that experience, meet people, like you said, mentorship. And we'll go to that point right there, exactly right now, talking about mentorship, talking about networking. I know it's a buzzword. It's very ambiguous, and no one knows what it means. But how important has having those mentors, having that network connections, having those friendships throughout the legal industry, how important has it been just for your whole career on the whole?
Yeah, critically important. Not only from the jobs I've gotten, so every job I've gotten has been because I knew somebody. and that got me in the door. But also once I went to the law firm, from the business I was able to generate. So, you know, the mentors is half the equation. The other part is the networking. And I'm just talking about getting to know people. So joining, right? You want to be an aviation lawyer, you go to Delta Airlines. You want to practice aviation law, you find the organizations and the people that do aviation law. And for me, that was American Bar Association's Air and Space Law Forum. All aviation lawyers, right? You like to talk about aviation law? Go hang out with them. And I did. And I went to their conferences and I hung out with them. For me, that was much better than talking about, family law or trust and estates. I like to talk about planes. So that's really how I did it. And that's how the networking works, right? The people you meet there become your friends and they say, hey, you know what? A job's coming available. Why don't we, you be interested in it?
Yeah, it just goes back to that point, the importance of being authentic, but also being able to be vulnerable, going out there, just speaking to people, introducing yourself, whatever it may be, telling your story, making some friends, because those people know other people who know other people, and that could open so many doors and opportunities, as I've seen, and as you clearly demonstrated throughout your whole career. What's funny enough is that you got every job from either a person you knew, a mentor, or a friend that you had. And I remember very long ago, I had Dan Cotter on my podcast very, very long ago. It's funny that I say very long ago. It was only like a little under a year ago. But he, had so many different jobs. And I realized as the episode went on, I was like, Dan, I gotta ask, like, do you just know everyone, like, from each job that you went in? Went exactly. So from there, every time I saw, people who had various different positions working at various different places, I would start with the hypothesis before I even saw it. I said, I'm going to take a guess that you have known every person that you've gotten a job with. It wasn't cold outreach or anything like that. They're just connected in every way, shape, or form. And usually, most of the, I've only been wrong once, but usually most of the time, that's how it works out. So after time at Delta Airlines, you started in 2004 as a partner at Nelson Mullins. You were there for 6 years. So how was that experience? And was that aviation law? Were you just doing aviation law there? Was that the firm?
Yeah, so here's the rest of the story, right? I drug my wife to Atlanta. I said, she said, I'll go with you, but if I don't like it, we're going back to Charleston. And, I said, okay. And I just thought, let's go do this. And 3 years later, she wakes me up in the middle of the night and she says, I'm going back. And I said, where are you going? And she says, I'm going to Charleston. You coming with me? And, I was like, okay, I told you I would. And I did. So here's the no burn bridges point of this lesson. I went back to the same law firm that I had left. I went back to Nelson Mullins. I never will forget. I was like, okay, she wants to go back. I'm good on going back. Charleston's home. So I called the managing partner up and I said, love to come back. He said, Mark, we'd love to have you, but we don't have any work for you. So if you want to start an aviation practice, come on back and have at it. And that's what I did. And I wrote and I spoke and I marketed myself as an aviation lawyer. And I connected with all the people that I knew at all the other airlines and said, if you ever have anything in South Carolina, I'm your guy. And gosh, within a couple of years, I had a multi-million-dollar book of business throughout the Southeast, and we marketed it as the Southeastern Aviation Law Practice, and it was flourishing. But that was all because of, like you said, just getting there, doing something, and putting myself out.
Yeah, so sort of on that point of putting yourself out there, like you said before, there's, different bar associations, there's aviation bar associations, there are rooms that you want to get into, sort of marketing yourself, branding yourself as the aviation lawyer. So what ways did you sort of market yourself, put yourself out there, sort of some advice for people out there who are looking to go into sort of that very specialized field such as aviation law? What sort of way, how should they go about doing it to get themselves out there and get that book of business?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing we talked about, right? That is going to those associations and meeting those people and offering to help, right? Hey, y'all are putting on a conference. I'd be happy to help with the next conference. And that's what I did. And they said, okay, we need people who will solicit sponsorships. No one wants to solicit sponsorships, right? That's the worst job for a conference, but I did it. And the next year I said, hey, I'm done with the sponsorships. I did a good job. What can I do next year? They said, well, you can host the speakers. Wow, that's cool. All these great speakers are coming. The next year I said, what can I do? Well, you can be on a panel. Hey, I'd love to do this. What can I do? Well, you can be a speaker on a panel. And after 4 or 5 years, it just went into that, Nate. And that was the neat thing about it. So that would be step number one, go to those associations. Number two, write and speak yourself, right? Because as you do that, and you've done this so well, you're building an internet online presence, right? So my goal was anytime somebody Googled aviation lawyer, South Carolina, I wanted to be number one. And I got that by writing articles in any magazine I could, speaking at any event I could. And that's hard to do when you're at a law firm, because when you're off doing that, nobody's paying your billable hours, right? But you are investing in yourself, and there's no better thing to do. And then those were the key things. And then the last one was kind of funny. And I went to a marketing seminar, and he said, hey, if you want to be picked up by the press as an aviation lawyer, find the person in your town who writes the aviation beat and just start sending him or her emails. And I'm like, God, that's got to be crazy. I don't want to be spamming somebody. But I did. I found the person for the Charleston Post and Courier who always wrote about planes, and I would just send him emails and say, hey, Jack, did you see this is happening? Love to talk to you. Or, hey, Jack, did you see next week, this airline's coming into Charleston? I went at Delta, love to talk to you. I did it. I spammed them about 6 times. And then finally I'm driving down the interstate one day, and the phone rings and it says, Mark. And I said, yeah. He says, this is Jack. He says, I'd love to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even know who it was at first. So the next day I was quoted in the paper in the article as aviation lawyer Mark Fava says. Boom, another Google hit, and the rest is history.
I mean, I can only imagine the secretary of Jack there, being like, "Oh, it's the Mark guy again.
Yeah, exactly.
He's calling and emailing again."
Let's just answer him to get him off our back. And Nate, the other thing they told me at that same seminar, and this goes to your point of learning from other people. That person told me there's 2 things that you need to do real quickly. You need to acknowledge who they are, and then ask them what their deadline is. I had no idea what the person was talking about. I thought I knew. I immediately pulled over. I pulled up my iPhone. I Googled it. I wrote down a very short quote, not a big, long, lawyerly, well, here's what I think this is going to go. I mean, just something that's punchy and short. And I'd asked him his deadline. He says, look, I need to know within the next hour, because if you don't answer the question, they're going to somebody else. So I said, I'll be right back with you. I pulled over on the side of the road, Googled what he was talking about, pulled out an envelope in the car, wrote down 1 or 2 sentences that were short and punchy, and I called back and got him. And those were the exact 2 sentences that were in the quote the next day. And that conversation was 30 seconds. And that was 5 years of telling everybody I was an aviation lawyer and spamming this poor reporter.
Well, I'm glad you made it into the paper. I'm glad your quiet persistence, which is so important, finally paid off. You just you just chip away, Because
Yes.
you're being nice about it. You're just being sincere about it. It's like, listen, I just want to be in the paper. I just want everyone to know that I'm an aviation lawyer. Eventually, you're gonna be like, all right, fine, I'll put you in the paper. They'll give way eventually, and clearly they gave way to you, and you made it into that paper. And now you're a major aviation lawyer across the country. But and to go back to the Google search, I not narcissistically, but at once I've Google searched myself, and I'm the first name. I make sure I'm that first name. I mean, I don't pay for anything or like do any SEO or search engine optimization. But every time I see it, other people have let me know. I'm like, yeah, I look up your name. You're always the first one. I'm like, yeah, that's good stuff there. But going forward in your career, after Nelson Mullins, you became a chief counsel at Boeing, which is very nice. And in doing so, how did you end up getting that position? Did you know someone in there? It had to be.
Had to be. Okay, so this is networking story number 3. The same group I'm in, the Air and Space Lawyer Forum. Not only had I written, spoke, done the sponsorship, and done all the grunt work, I was finally on the board. So I'm on the board of the ABA Air and Space Law Forum. I go to all the conferences. The night before, I go to all the speakers' dinners. I'm at the board meetings with the leaders of other aviation industries. And sitting right next to me is the vice president of that same company, government operations of the Boeing company. He was on the board also. And I mentioned to him, I said, hey, look, Dick, I said, I know that Boeing's coming to South Carolina. If they ever do, I'm the only aviation lawyer in the state, and I'd love to work for you guys, right? So and we're saying this over a cocktail party. I didn't want to give a hard sale to him, but I knew there was only one other aviation lawyer in the state, and I wanted to be the person. And Dick looks at me and slaps me on the back and says, Mark, he says, that's nice to know. He says, but I don't think we need a lawyer down there anytime soon, but give me your card again and I'll pass your information along, and let's go get another drink. And I'm like, okay, at least I tried. I didn't hear anything for 6 weeks. And 6 weeks later, I got called and I started a 3-month interview process and got the job again, because I knew somebody.
Well, that is amazing, and that is quick-witted thinking there to just sort of pass it along that little soft sell of just like, hey, I'm the only aviation lawyer in the state, by the way, and I know you're an airplane company and you probably need those people. So I'm just letting you know. I'm just letting you know if you ever need anything. You're not being aggressive or anything. You're just like, hey,
Oh,
listen, this is who I am. This is what I do, and you might need it one day. And clearly, 6 weeks later, they did indeed, and that's what you've been doing for the last 12 years. But I want to go back to something that you said before. Doing those conferences, lending your hand, and like you said, you weren't getting paid for any of it. You were just providing value without anything in return. So how important is it just to simply provide that value, sort of, you know, giving out, giving back to the community, giving back to the aviation specialization within the law, and not expecting anything in return. But as I like to say, what you give into the world, you get back in some way, shape, or form, just like you did getting that job in Boeing. So how important is it just to constantly provide value to people such as that?
I think it's incredibly important. Some at the law firm, some of the most rewarding cases I ever handled were pro bono cases. And back when I first started, they were court assigned cases. I mean, you would get in Charleston County used to do this. You would get an envelope in the mail with an order from a judge saying, Mark Fava, you are hereby appointed to be the lawyer for XYZ case. And these could be horrific, child custody cases. But I got to tell you, Nate, those were the most rewarding for me. Because I was providing value to somebody and a service that they could never otherwise get from a top-notch law firm. So I think it's very important. And then getting active in the local community. I've been on a number of boards right now. I'm on the Southeastern Wildlife Association board. It's a wonderful nonprofit. I've been on school boards. I've been on ballet boards because all three of our daughters danced. All of those can be very, very difficult. I've been on the Coastal Crisis Chaplaincy Board here. Um, again, I think the feeling you get for giving value with not expecting anything in return is much more tremendous than giving value and getting compensated for it. At the end of the day, that's how people will remember you.
Yeah, and it's sort of like this. I guess when you think about it in your mind, maybe there's this a strange paradox. It's like, why would I do something if I'm not getting in return? But you got to have that long-term vision. You got to think about weeks down the line, months down the line, that me providing this value, I will somehow get repaid for it in some way, shape, or form. And clearly throughout your career, all the jobs that you had is from that value that you've provided. Being active in the community, being on those boards, and all that stuff. Love it so much. I think it's great information that people need to hear because it's so important to put yourself out there. I know it well, you know it well, and you certainly have put your whole stories, you've put yourself out there, you've put your whole life into a book. The Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom, and Sea Stories for Leaders. And I'll repeat again that it will be in the description below. So I implore all of you to check it out. And I implore all of you to buy it because it's a wonderful book. But let's get into the book itself. Now, one of the big things that I saw is how important it is to be an active learner. So can you talk about what does that mean? What does it mean to be an active learner?
Yeah, when I started out very early in my career, I figured the best way to succeed was find the people and the leaders that I admired and either work for them or watch them. And then take what they do and try and incorporate it in the fabric of my leadership. So, in the Navy, before I went to law school, after I left my first job in a squadron, and I went up to work with this same mentor who had recruited me to go work on the Admiral staff. The Admiral was a great boss, and he taught me so many things, not only about how to handle people, but how to handle pressure. And I just figured out at that point, boy, if I can look at the people I admire and try to emulate the good aspects and look at the people I don't like and say, I'm never going to be like that person, that is how you learn. So active learner for me was always trying to, in this regard, look at the people that you respect and like and pick up the aspects that you like about them, and always have the radar up for those things.
Absolutely. And of course, I have to agree with all of that. I think one of the most important lessons you put in there is finding those people that you admire, working them, watching them, emulate, find those people who are in the places where you want to be and sort of try to emulate them, but make it into your own. Ingrain their knowledge into you so it sort of creates that unique perspective that you have, that you're taking things from each and every person and it's making it into you. It's like, you got the different parts of your identity, and a part of those parts of your whole identity is those things that you learn throughout your career, the knowledge that you're gaining, being that active learner, that learner for life, to continue learning, continue gaining that knowledge, be a sponge to that sort of stuff. I do it all the time. I love, obviously, I have a podcast. So all the great podcasters that have ever existed, I try to emulate them. I say all the time that I've stolen basically everything that is a part. I literally, I'm a thief. I'm a literal thief of all the podcast stuff. All the introductions are literally inspired by other podcasts. Like it, sometimes I'm just copying. But there's nothing wrong with it. I'm trying to emulate them because they're successful and I want to be successful just like them. Now, one of the things that you wrote about that I love so much, it's one of the most important things that I try to do in my daily life is to do your homework. So what does it mean to do your homework?
Yeah. You know, so as an aide, every single day was a performance. You had to know exactly where you were going to be, who you were going to meet, what time you were going to be there. There was no room for surprises. And when surprises occurred, you really needed to be nimble and move forward. And the only way you could do that is if you did your homework, right? So I would research, know in advance, ask questions so I could brief the admiral and that the execution would be flawless the next day. And that was 18 months of doing that. And the neat thing about that is those lessons dovetailed very nicely into being a lawyer, right? Because it's the same thing. It's the same thing with your podcast, right? It's execution, it's timeliness, it's excellence. Knowing when you go in a room, who's in the room, knowing what the subject matter is going to be, knowing who the decision makers are. So that was really the dovetail into the active learner part, always figuring it out, doing your research. And I might not be the smartest person in the room, or I might not be the smartest lawyer in the room, but there's not too many people that are going to out hustle me, especially in the beginning.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I've really tried to hone in on, especially through this podcast, is learning everything I possibly can about the potential guests that I have, looking everything up, putting their name in Google, going so far as putting their name in Google just to see if there's articles that I can find, little tidbits that they probably, I've caught a lot of people off guard. I definitely have caught a lot of people off guard. And even I remember an episode I had with Selena Lee, who's absolutely wonderful. It was the longest episode I think to date. It was like almost 2 hours long. It was crazy. We were
Wow.
talking forever. We were having great conversation. She is a great storyteller. But I spoke about how she used to do these short interviews in New York City, interviewing entrepreneurs. And she eventually started her own podcast, but she was totally shocked that I brought it up. She's like, I haven't even thought about that for years. And I can't believe, but it just goes to that point of doing your homework. You just catch someone off guard like that, and then you start talking about something that really, really had a significant part of their life and a huge emphasis on what they would do later in their life. But another thing you talked about, which I struggle with a lot, especially with my classes, is being on time.
Yeah.
As my father tells me all the time, and what his college football coach used to tell them, if you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, there will be consequences. So how important is it to be on time, just in pretty much anything?
Yeah, I think that just goes to people looking at your character, right? Because if you're late, you're imposing on somebody else, and it kind of shows that you're not respecting their time. Now, look, there's all kinds of reasons in the world to be late. It all happens. It happens to all of us all the time. And when you do, you just say, "I'm sorry," or you text somebody and say, "I'm running 5 minutes late. There's a traffic accident. Something's going on with my kid." Blah blah blah. But gosh, you ought to endeavor to be on time all the time. And I love what you're saying about being early, especially if there's something that big is going down, because you want to get in there, get well acquainted and well acclimated to the room or wherever you are, get comfortable, see who else is there, chat with them, right? You don't go right into the business. So I just think being on time is wonderful. And like your dad says, being early is even better for just a number of reasons.
Of course, especially for college football, because they listen, the whole team's waiting on you, and you don't want that, or you'll be running up and down those hills. As he found out one day, he told me
Yeah.
to find out
And
one day that he was running forever, throwing out the whole. It's terrible, it's terrible. But he learned his lesson.
well, and
Be early.
the coach might make the whole team run too, and then you're really in trouble
Exactly.
for your being
Everyone's,
late.
everyone's pissed at you. They're like, "Why would you do that? Can you just be on time one day?" All that fun stuff. And I guess to the other side of being on time as well, something that I did very unintentionally with my only legal internship. I actually wrote about it a couple days ago. But when I
Saw
worked
that.
at the district attorney's office, I would stay after for so long, very unintentionally. I just lose track of time all the time. But I'd be studying, I'd be doing my work. It'd be like 5:30, and my boss would come in and he'd be like, "Nate, can you please go home?" Like he's like, "You're just an intern." He's like, "You're not even a law student. Like please, like your mom's worried about you probably." And I was like, "Sorry, man. Like I just lost track of time." But they gained so much respect for me from doing that, and it was genuinely, it was super unintentional. I didn't even mean to. I just don't look at the clock sometimes. I lock in and like I can't get out. But they really gained a lot of respect from me. They're like, wow, you know what? He's taking the initiative. He's staying after a little longer, and I don't mind. I got stuff to do. Yeah, I got to go to the gym, but like the gym will always be there. I'll just go later. It's fine. But another thing that you talked about, which I actually agree with, that I actually think about, sort of my framework that I work with, is thinking ahead. I like in my life to think in probabilities that, every decision that I make, there's outcomes that can come from it. I put in percentages. It's like, okay, this is the most likely, this is the less likely. Usually the most likely happens, but I always prepare for those other options. So how important is it to think ahead as a leader, rather? How important is it thinking ahead, being able to sort of plan out all the possible things that can happen and the consequences that can come from it, sort of, being able to be there in that moment and be, okay, this is what we have to do.
Yeah, look, that's critically important. And I made, this is probably just 5 or 6, maybe 10 years ago. I made the terrible mistake of not thinking ahead and then telling my boss when he was quite honestly chewing me out that that I hadn't thought ahead. He's Mark blah 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 this that and the other, and it was getting pretty bad on the phone. And finally, he goes, what do you have to say for yourself? And I said, I'm sorry. I said, my dad always said, when you're wrong, just admit it and move on. Apologize. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't think of that. And there was this pause on the phone, and he just said, I pay you to think ahead. Don't you ever use that excuse again with me, Fava. And I'm like going, oh my gosh, and I was like, okay, I got it, and look, I'm 50 something years old at that time, right? So this is the active learner part. And I'm like, okay, I got it. I knew that when I was an aide. I sort of forgot it when I was responding to you. And I think it's just critical, like you said, to think ahead, because if you're thinking, what am I going to do next? What are the possibilities or probabilities of something going wrong? You're prepared when something does go wrong or go sideways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the point of that you were, 50, 60 years old and you're still being told, you're still being reminded, but still learning. You're still learning new things. Even to this day, we all got to be constantly learning new things, always got to be gaining that knowledge because it only helps. Because when you go back and when you talk about these stories, when you write about these stories, young people get to learn from it and now they know, okay, I got to think ahead, I got to plan ahead. So I don't end up like Mark getting chewed out on the phone, but you learned and you moved from it. And now it's in these stories, and now people can learn from it. So wonderful. But another thing that you talked about is investing in people for the future. I love it so much. I think it's so, so important, but I'll let you talk about it. How important is investing in people for the future, investing your time in those young people where they could become something special later down the line?
Yeah, this is probably, secondarily to doing something, on a pro bono basis for free as a lawyer. I've always thought that because people did it for me, it was my job to hire and retain good people and then to invest in them, right? To surround myself with good people that would work hard for me, that would be loyal to me, but at the same time, I would ensure their success, right? And I got to tell you, Nate, where I am now, I'd say maybe the 6 or 7 people or that in the past couple of years, maybe 10 or so, who have worked or reported directly to me, every single one of them has gotten a promotion. And it's because they're hard workers, but let me tell you, it's also because a good leader puts forward their good people, right? You're always promoting them. And I mentioned this in the book, pointing to the assist, or if someone did a great job for me and I got credit for it, I would turn around and say, look, that really wasn't me. Jack really did all the work, or the credit goes to Leslie. And that's something I learned from the Admiral. When somebody would compliment his speech or something I'd done, he'd just look to me and say, Mark did that for me. It was all his credit. And I think that's just tremendously important because that leaves a wonderful legacy, and people really appreciate it, as have I.
Those are so significant points. Of course, always got to give credit, always got to give credit when it's due. Even if you played an integral part, other people played their part, and it wasn't possible without those other people. I talk about it all the time. This podcast wasn't possible without my parents because they bought this microphone. If I didn't have this microphone, I'd look like an idiot and I wouldn't have a podcast. So I have to thank them for that, of course, because they all played a huge part. Of course, all my guests played a huge part. Podcast wouldn't be possible without podcast guests. I just can't come on here and talk about it because I have nothing to talk about. So those people have a lot to talk about. So I have to thank them for everything because, of course, everyone played their integral part. I'm not a one-man show. there are multiple different parts. There's a lot that goes into the production of it, a lot that goes into the information of the podcast. It wouldn't be possible without the podcast guests themselves, of course. But something else that you talked about is having clear expectations. And this is something you found out early in your career, that meeting those expectations, but also finding out those expectations, either from your boss, it was from the admiral in your case, but how important is it as sort of a person who is in the position, who, is responding to a boss, responding to an admiral, who need to figure out those expectations, but also on the flip side, being a leader and being able to set those specific expectations, letting those people know, this is what you have to do, this is what I expect from you, and they go out and achieve it.
Yeah, so that's spot on. Look, when you're working for somebody, I think it's critical to understand very early on what those expectations are. And if they don't sit you down and tell you what they are, you ought to ask them, hey, look, here's what I plan on doing, or what do you think? Secondarily, you ought to ask the people around them, right? Executive office assistants are great. Hey, how does he or she like this? Other people who work with them, what does he or she like or doesn't like? That's critically important.
As I have found out myself, being specific is so important, just in general in life, being specific what you want to do. And
Yeah.
Because it can help you take those steps, those specific steps that you need to take, but also setting those specific expectations, help those people, as if you are a leader and you're leading people and setting those specific expectations, allow them to take those specific steps that they need to take. You're being clear, they know exactly what they have to do, and that's where the great success comes from. But to take a step back a little bit, just holistically, why'd you write the book in the first place?
Yeah. I always wanted to write a book. Matter of fact, I've got, about 4 or 5 of them banging around in my head, and this is the first one. And I had taken notes many, many years ago on this job. And what I realized was so many things I was still doing as a lawyer 30 years later were things that I had learned many, many years ago. So I thought it would be fun to finally put that down on paper, and see if I could get a publisher to do it. And I ended up going with a great hybrid publisher. He's just done a phenomenal job, but I really wanted to share my stories with other people. And it's taken me 2 years to put it together, but just really excited about it. And it hasn't been an easy journey. I started finally putting pen to paper in the middle of the pandemic. I was sitting around, I never watched TV, and I was sitting around watching Schitt's Creek and a bunch of TV shows thinking, there's got to be a better use of my time. So I just started writing, and that's how I did it and why I did it.
Did you begin writing pen and paper, or did you start typing first? Was it pen and paper?
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta ask.
Yeah, I'm a pen and paper person, but I did it just typing, but all the editing, and Nate, I've probably got 20 inches stacks of maybe inch and a half pieces of paper clipped with a black binder on there that I edited. So all the editing was hand editing, and then I would go back to the Word document and redline it and send it to the publisher. And the funny thing was, my first publisher went bankrupt, and I lost all my money, and I was like, you know what, I still want to write this. So after 6 months of a pity party, I found another publisher, and the first publisher, I had 60,000 words, and the first publisher says, you got to cut this down. There's way too much in there. So I cut it all down. I got to my second publisher 6 months later, and they said, gosh, this is good, but you don't have enough words. You got to add more content. So, it was brutal, because I'm like, okay, what version of these 20 versions did I cut it? And how do you try to undo an edit that's gone through 6 edits? It's just not easy. So that's probably another 6 inches on the stack. And that's how I got it done. And boy, having a good editor and a great publisher has just meant the world, because, they told me, hey, stop talking like a lawyer, right? Just as you said before we started this podcast, be transparent, tell it like it is. Use the language you use then. And we want to hear and feel what happened to you back then. And that's how I did it. And I'm just really excited to get it out.
Yeah, having that authentic voice is so important. Being yourself, being able to express yourself with the words on the page. Sometimes it's hard, you got all these words in your head and you put it on the page, you're like, wow, that's crap. But I felt that way before many times, and when I started writing all these articles, when I'd look at the computer, I'd be like, wow, that doesn't make any sense. it's grammatically wrong, ridiculously, and it's like, okay, now, and I just delete the whole paragraph. I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna do it all over again because it's so hard to take these thoughts in your head, put it on a page, and make it look good. But you have certainly done that throughout your book. I loved it very much. But Mark, we're now down to our last five questions. The first of the five questions, something I've seen throughout my entire journey doing this podcast. I'll see what you got with this question. You're an older guy, but you got that youthful energy. Don't worry, you got that vitality. I don't want to call people old. I don't want to call people old on the podcast. But this is sort of the tech stack question. So what sort of tech are you using? Because the law is, moving in a certain direction. They got new AI technology, software technologies, whatever it may be. So what kind of tech are you using in your daily life, if anything? And, what recommendations would you have for people out there, either in your personal life or just, at work or in business, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I tell you what, I'm dabbling in Chat GPT. I'm not as far along as most people are. I do ask it questions and find it to be phenomenal. I don't let it write my content. I've tried a couple times, to throw it out there. Even a post I did today on LinkedIn, I've hit the feature rewrite with AI, and it wasn't what I wanted to say, and it was wrong. So to remain genuine and transparent, I'm still learning in that, and I find it absolutely fascinating. And it is where we need to go. And you can teach an old dog new tricks, and I'm going to continue to focus on that. The other thing I was fascinated with, Nate, was I read my own audiobook, so it's going to come out in Audible, and I did that just like this over Zoom using Audacity with an audiobook producer in London, and it has been absolutely phenomenal, that technology, just using off-the-shelf Audacity. He produces an incredible product. He's in the UK. He's a subcontractor with my current publisher, and I went with the publisher who I knew would produce a good-looking book. And this audiobook producer is the same way. So those are the two that really have me inspired. I mean, to think I'm sitting in front of my computer with a Shure microphone and a headset on, talking to a guy in the UK who's scrolling down my transcript, highlighting when I make mistakes, putting 10 hours of audio together in just this incredible book was pretty fun.
No, I myself have actually never heard of Audacity. This is the first time, so maybe if I read a book one day, I know exactly where to go for my audiobook. But ChatGPT, I'm a big fan, a huge fan. I've been using ChatGPT since it actually first released, which is like one of the greatest releases in internet history. I think it had more users than anything else ever in internet history. But I love it so much. I use it all the time. I use it for research. I use it for creating ideas. I write all my own content. I've never used ChatGPT. Well, that's not true. I've used it to sort of refine a lot of content, but a lot of, I like to write it myself. Like you said, when you use the rewrite thing on LinkedIn, it didn't exactly bring out the answers, or, frame it in the way that you want it to. You're like, hey, wait, go back, go back. But it's such a wonderful tool. I've become sort of the master of prompts. I'm not well known around school, but my circle of friends, they always ask me, what do I do? I use different GPTs too. I use all these different prompts. I sort of, manipulate the sort of thing, because you got to talk to it like it's a person, because it really
Yeah.
helps, because that's what it's built upon. It is a large language model, but it's based upon the human brain. It's based upon human beings. So when you talk to it like a person, it will give you much better answers. That's what I found. The one thing, my one tip or trick, I always say at the beginning of every prompt, I say take a deep breath. Why? I heard it on a podcast one time, and it actually did work. The other tip or trick, I always use, the people that are very good in their respective industries. So if I'm doing podcast ideas, I'll say, do it in the likes of Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, Tim Ferriss. So I'm sort of picking out their brains, sort of taking what they do and
Wow.
putting it into that prompt. And it will actually deliver it in a way where it's influenced by all those different people, those best podcasts. Then it's giving me ideas from the best podcasters ever. And it's like, wow, I just did like, hours worth of work in about 5 seconds when I click the enter button. So I love ChatGPT so much. I use Perplexity as well. It's a great product. There's so many. There's just so many. I could go on, and I will not. But fourth to last question here, Mark, live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast. What are your book recommendations for people? Doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books you've ever read. You can include your own book. But any books you've ever read that are your favorite, something you give a gift to someone.
Yeah. I just I just read a great one or two, and what I do is I typically focus on military history and leadership books. So I got to tell you, it's hard not to like any of Admiral McRaven's books. You know, the Make Your Bed in the Morning is just phenomenal, based on a speech he gave. Um, that's a wonderful one. When I when I wrote the book, my book, I was also reading at the time Tuesdays with Maury. At the time, Mom had just gotten ALS, and I was trying to figure out what ALS was all about. And that was just a wonderful book because you just had in your mind an image of more, you never really knew the person, but you just had the image. And that's what I was trying to recreate in my book. I never give you his name. I never tell you anything else. All the names are fictitious, but I just wanted you to get the sense and the feel of quote unquote the admiral. So those are two far extremes, but I think two great books and book series, and I've got a stack of them on my bedside table. And every time a friend of mine publishes one, it's really cool when you know the author. I just bought one the other day, and it was about writing nonfiction books, leadership books. And I just bought her a book and sent her a text and said, "Hey, I got the book. It's inbound." So I've got quite a few in queue, and they go into the briefcase when I'm traveling, and usually get read then because I've got a lot of time to do it, and I focus at home primarily on writing and family.
Of course, I mean, those are great recommendations. Those are recommendations we've never had on the podcast, and I always love new book recommendations. I eat books, so I got some new ones to read, of course. But third to last question here. What are the sorts of things that you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis? Either that be through social media. So people still use Facebook apparently. But Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Reddit, any Substacks you subscribe to, any podcasts that you listen to that you recommend to people. What is crossing the transom of Mark's mind on a daily basis?
Yeah, yeah. So they tell you when you write a book, go to where your audience is, right? And the research will show that for most of the people that I'm trying to attract right now, it's probably on LinkedIn. So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and that's clearly where I ran across you, no doubt about it. And I find that's where the audience is. So if I'll be doing that, and I am one of the old fogies still on Facebook, because that's where. So my audience is really two-tiered, right? It's the younger, what I would call the early career, younger mid-career generation who I want to give these ideas to. And then it's my generation who's going to read the book and laugh, right? Because been there, done that. We've been in the Navy. We've made those mistakes, and that's where the term "sea stories" comes from. So I'm doing that. My daughters have me on Instagram. I'm still trying to figure that out. Boy, they rate my posts. I did one the other day with 3 pictures, and the music only worked for the first picture, and I was like, "Damn it, how do I get this right?" So that's pretty much it. And I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm in a professional speakers group called Impact 11. And right now, what I will typically do is, because they put out such good content, and it's a pay to play group. I'm in this community group. I will, like you said, if you want to speak and if you want to write, just same thing. You want to be an aviation lawyer. Well, maybe when I retire, I'd like to do more speaking, and I'm doing that now. But maybe I want to do it professionally. I'm listening to those now, and it's just phenomenal speakers that tell you how to do it right, and that again goes back to being an active learner.
Learner for life, of course. It's so, so important. I mean, I'm still young, so I have to be a learner. It is a requirement. But even when I'm old, it is a requirement. I still have to be a learner, continuing to learn throughout my whole life, learning new things, gaining new perspectives. I love it so much. I just got to start traveling soon. You've done a lot of
Oh yeah.
traveling. Did you love those planes? But I need to do some traveling. Maybe I learn how to fly a plane so I could just fly myself across the country myself. Maybe, perhaps, I don't know. I'm a bit scarred. The one mock trial case that I did, my first ever one, was about a plane crash. So I know all about planes. It's very weird. It's very weird.
Wow.
I know a bit about planes. I know there's like the tornado spin. When you're spinning down, you start going down, you go down like a tornado, and they crash into a mountain. It was a crazy story. Not real, of course. And the guy had an ear infection, and that's what we were trying to prove. That was the reason why he had crashed, because he had that ear infection. And your ears and balance and flying are so important. See, I don't know how I know all these things. It's just, the expert witnesses. I had to do an expert witness, it was all right. It was all right. I like the character witnesses a little bit more. I don't know. I don't know, actually. Now I'm thinking about it. Expert witnesses are much easier to write. They're a little dry, so you got to make them a little exciting. But I was fortunate enough. I had a great witness, so she did great. But
Awesome.
second to last question here. You're an aviation attorney at Boeing, but Mark, what is an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for you?
Yeah, I heard this the other day on your phenomenal podcast with Rob Hanna. Look, an ideal Friday night is probably at home. You know, we've got three daughters, two are off, but one is still in the house. And you know, the days of going out all the time, or I still do it, but the other wonderful thing is maybe a good meal somewhere in Charleston at a wonderful restaurant. We just got phenomenal restaurants in downtown Charleston, and that's one of the wonderful things to be here. Sunday morning, early, get up. If I can go for a long walk, listen to a podcast, that's great. And spend the rest of the day, you know, getting ready for the weekend, relaxing is typically an ideal Sunday. And if it's fall, maybe putting something in the smoker, which is a good thing to do because I could sit on the back porch in the evening and with a beer and you know smell the smoke and get ready for the ribs or the pork roast to come out, uh, uh, or something on the grill. So those would be probably the best times.
A smoker. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I've never used any of it. It's not that complex. It just takes a bunch of hours, but it pays off. It pays off well. I know it does. I've ate smoked meats and I said, wow, I need to get my own. I need to try this myself. And the grill as well. I love the grill as well. Making a nice fat steak on the grill is
Yeah.
great for your soul. Just great for your soul. You feel great afterwards. You make it like, wow, this is what I've done. And then you eat it and you feel even better. Sometimes a little full, you feel a little uncomfortable. You know, the buttons in the pants start unbuckling. You're like, all right, you know what? It was worth my time. But Mark, final question here. I did this at the end of every single episode, but what are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the legal professionals out there in the world?
Yeah, look, we talked a little bit about this before we went on the line. It's just pursue your passions, right? Don't let anybody tell you no. Don't let anybody get in your way of no, of what you want to do. And then find the people in the groups that lift you up and then inspire you to go where you want to be. The practice of law can be extremely difficult, but extremely rewarding at the same time. And I've loved it as my career. When I got to the point where I thought, you know, the law firm days were getting a little rough, being, you know, the billable hours, find something else. And I got lucky in part because Boeing was here, and I got lucky in part because a friend of mine called me even before that to go to Delta. But you know, don't be miserable in your life. Find what you enjoy, pursue it. And it's up to you. I think Rob said this in some way. It's up to you to do so. I feel the same way, right? So many people are like, "Oh, this is terrible. I don't want to." You know what? Make it happen. Invest in yourself because there's no better investment.
Make the most of it and always find those people out there that are doing what you want to do and follow them, watch them, work with them, whatever you can do, get close to them because you will learn so much. As Sir Isaac Newton says, yes, Sir Isaac Newton quote, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So go find those giants and follow them like it's your day job. But Mark, that is the episode. That is the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on here, spreading your wisdom, spreading your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, first I must say, check out Mark's book in the description below, Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders. It is Mark's new book. It's coming out in January. I implore all of you to go get it. I enjoyed it, and you will enjoy it too. And of course, check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com, Lawyers in the Making, one word, substack.com. And I will see you all in the next one.